The Hay Band Network.
Welcome to the Hay Band Network. This is Chad Dempsey, and today we are continuing our diversity series with our guest, Don Haynes. Mr. Haynes, welcome to the Hay Band Network.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be with you guys.
I am super excited because we've known each other for several years, and so now we've got this going on. You did a presentation at Texas Bandmaster Association recently that was a home run in my book, and talking about things along the lines of diversity and social injustice, several things, inclusion. And so to have you on, what can we do as band directors and how do we start that conversation? I think you're a perfect guest. So to those that are watching, Mr. Haynes is a retired band director. He was the head director at LBJ High School in Austin for 40 years. Was at Anderson High School for a couple years prior to that. And fun fact on Mr. Haynes, he has an auditorium, a performing arts center on the campus named after himself. So congrats. I think that's awesome. I'm excited to have you here. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
So for our audience, we're really going to dig into a conversation that's a very hot topic and one that it needs to be addressed and is being conversed about and people are talking about. And hopefully with Mr. Haynes' guidance, we can help directors out how to have conversations about race, social injustice, diversity, inclusion in our classrooms, in our music programs, and how that affects us as music teachers.
Right.
So we thank you for joining us. We are looking to have a multiple conversation, so we will have more than one episode. So if you have questions like, hey, this would be great. Can we I would love to hear Mr. Haynes speak about this and dive into this. Let us know through our Facebook page, the Hay Band Network Facebook page. Let us know, and we will get back and have those topics discussed on our next conversation in upcoming weeks, okay? So, all right, let's dig in. Let's talk a little bit about you, Mr. Haynes. You've got some great stories. You're from Corpus Christi and growing up. So tell us a little bit about your history into getting in the band director field.
Okay. Well, my first music teacher was my dad. He was trumpet player, band director at the all-black school in Corpus Christi. He was a trumpet player, and I learned how to play trumpet at the age of 6. Took piano lessons. Mom was an opera singer, so music kind of ran through the DNA, if you will. Fast forward to getting into band program at the high school level. What's really interesting in my life is desegregation was still in place up until my 10th grade year, which is around 1967. And I graduated in 1969. And when there was forced integration, it went over really well, very smooth in Corpus Christi, which is where I grew up, born and grew up. And my high school band director up into graduation is the world famous Eddie Galvan, who took me under his wing, and we became very, very, very close friends. He and my dad were good friends, and he was one of my mentors throughout my early years of my career. Went to Del Mar College 2 years, then came to UT here in Austin, and I've been here ever since. And I think it's really exciting to know that in the early 70s, when I got to UT in 71, it was the right time for me and the right time for the University of Texas had just begun to embrace diversity. They still struggle with attracting people of color, and they're still working with that, but it's so much better now today than it was back then. But I was really embraced by Vincent Argenino and all of the professors at UT, because there weren't a lot of students walking down the the music building that looked like me. And it wasn't that people stared at me, it was just, why don't we see more? And over time, that began to happen. When I student taught with Berta Harrington, who was just another one of my major mentors, pretty much changed the trajectory of my life, my career. Student taught with her at a middle school, and then she and I opened up Anderson High School. And so we both had a great time those 2 years that I was with her at Anderson. She being a female, me being an African-American young kid, we both kind of just held hands and forged through the challenges. And there wasn't very many, but the ones that were there, she absorbed that. And I think it's pretty fascinating. It's maybe some of your listeners might feel like they've had to go through this as well, and I'll make it pretty short. When you're a head band director and there's some really major challenges, whether it's race or whether it's a student said something or a teacher did something, usually the head band director has to try to solve that, because you don't want your young assistant director to be burdened with all of that because they just got out of school. You know, there might be some times when you say, hey, listen, I need to help you be ready for something like this when you become a head band director. It could be something with bookkeeping, or, you know, a parent was inappropriate, or you go to a football game and kids, you know, sneak away and grab a hot dog and they're not supposed to, or whatever. Um, so I had a lot of good teachers and good mentors. But here's the most exciting part for me. When I got to LBJ, I was only 24, which you take over, and back then the largest school was 4A, and then came 5A and 6A. So it was a large 4A. We were the largest classification that UIL had. And the community absolutely opened their arms to me, welcomed me, gave me a standing ovation when I was introduced in the band hall as their new band director. So that was great. I know that doesn't always happen, but I got to experience that. So that really did just skyrocket my career, knowing that the kids and I just instantly bonded. Our value system was very identical. You know, some of my seniors were only 3 or 4 years younger than me. So I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So that's kind of a snapshot of how it all got started. And then over time, just had a wonderful experience for 40 years.
So as a band director for 40 years at this school, the population was, you had all sorts of population. I'm sure it changed over time also. Some of it's the population, but not so much that school, but did the population change, and how did you relate to all your different students with different backgrounds? Not even racial, but like SES, all sorts of types of students you had come through your band hall door.
Well, when I got to LBJ, the band was already incredibly close. We didn't have a lot of Hispanic students, but we had students of, you know, of all different racial backgrounds. And even more importantly than that, since a lot of them went to the same elementary school in that community, they were already pretty close because they had grown up together. There was one main middle school that most of them went through. And this was back in the day and period before the Academy High School came on. That didn't happen until 10 years up the road. So when I first got to LBJ, the band program was already getting itself, it was the second year of the school. And the first year, Glenn Richter, who went on to be the band director, marching band director at UT Longhorn Band, and music professor there before he retired. He was there before I got there. He was there for 1 year. And then I got the position when he went over to UT. So yeah, a lot of the students that were already there just really embraced each other. That wasn't a challenge for me. In fact, I remember a couple of different directors my second or third year we would have casual conversations and say, man, I went to an LBJ football game and your kids are just great. They're having a good time. And they just seem to be really, really close and tight. He said, how did you do that? And I'll say, I didn't do that. It was already like that when I got there. We just kind of keep it going. So that was a beautiful thing. I don't know what it's like at most other schools, but the fact that when kids go to the same middle school, elementary, middle school, and then go to the same high school, those kind of things just sort of naturally are very organic. They just happen as long as they feel like they're being treated fairly by the band director staff. We hovered around 17, 18, 1900 student body size. And the band program is the largest band I've ever had there at LBJ was around 230, which was pretty large for that number of students on campus. And the band program was pretty much the hot shot program on campus, and right up there with football.
So the conversation and the topic that we really want to get into for this is how do we deal with, you've got tons of experience and you go around and have helped out student teachers and been around campuses after you were at LBJ, and you've judged in all sorts of areas in the state and probably across the country. So, but one of the things is, how can we as band directors start the conversation with our classes about race, about the social justice? How can directors in this day and age in 2020 start that conversation, and things that we can start to do to help each other out and our students?
Right. I'm going to start with the suggestion that band directors and teachers try to use a different phrase than social justice, because we all have different meanings of that wrapped around in our head. And if you just keep it really simple, and that's the main point I want to drive home. And I've thought about this a lot, Chad. And that is, when did this start becoming a thing? Well, it's always been there, but we never really uncovered it like it got uncovered in the months of April, May, June, with the protesting and with all the different things that happen. We hear it about it on the news, and then we kind of just dismiss it within the next 10 seconds. But I think it's fair to the conversation to say that when the entire world saw the George Floyd situation, God bless him, that's when it really hit home. And that's when it struck such a major nerve that other topics began to uncover. For example, there's been a lot of conversation on campus about being a bully. Don't be a bully, because we've seen that it can devastate a child, regardless of their nationality or their race. And there have been students that take their own lives because they just were so, devastated by what other students were saying about them. But getting back to where we are now, having a conversation as a band director with your students, I would say, keep it real simple and tell the kids, this is what we're going to start doing. And they will have a very clear mindset of where you're going with this. Why are you even talking about it? And something that we band directors sometimes forget is just how smart our kids really are. And I'm going to say that in a different way. Sometimes we think that if we bring up a certain topic, they're going to go, oh, no, they've already talked about it. They already know about it. They just haven't had an opportunity to hear you talk about it and maybe take it one step further. One of my favorite sayings to my student teachers is, if your brass players don't know how to double tongue, well, don't complain about it. Teach them. Mm-hmm. If your kids don't know what is going on in the world and how to help them get ready for their future, then let's teach them. Now, I'm not talking morals and values and all of that. I'm just talking about things like, let's start off with being respectful. I have no idea, as I look at my entire trumpets, let's say you have 18 trumpets in the section. We see trumpets. Right behind those instruments are real people. And they all come from different homes, maybe a couple different religions. Mom, a single parent might be the case, might be grandparents. You just never know. And it really devastates a kid when we are not sensitive to what they're going through in their own little world. So if you get a chance to talk to 3 or 4, then you can really get deep. But if you're talking to the whole band, I would say to start off with a real easy conversation. For example, say, hey guys, tell you what, put your instrument in your case for a second. Before we start rehearsal, we're gonna start a conversation about some things that happened in the summer of 2020, whenever you decide to have this conversation. And we're gonna just start with this one thing, and I'm gonna write these words on the board. When you have a comment, make it respectful. And number 2, make it a positive comment, because that's the only way that people are going to listen to what you have to say. And we certainly don't want to create a fight amongst ourselves. What we want to try to do is understand. So I think it's important to band directors, first of all, decide, A, is this important? Well, I think we all agree. It is important. But then I think the toughest thing that a lot of band directors, Chad, are going to struggle with is this my job? I'm supposed to be teaching, the fundamentals, for whatever we're working on in our band music. But I want to encourage the listeners, you got to stop and you have to help them get ready for life beyond you and the band. I love trumpet, I love flute, I love clarinet, but there are other things in life that are going to be way, way, way more important, because at the end of the day, we want our children to graduate with those beautiful caps and gowns on, being better citizens, being ready to go and be highly functional in a diverse world. In your part of the state of Texas, it looks different than it does in suburban Austin or East Austin or West Austin. We know that. You just open your eyes and you can see that. So your conversation with your kids might be a little different than it would be for me and my students. But keep in mind, I'm going to go back to the passionate part. And I would make the first conversation relatively short. You don't have to ask a kid to speak, but give them an opportunity to start digesting this. That would be my approach. I think one of the questions you asked me to consider before we did this interview was, how did I do some of that as an African-American band director? I think the best answer I can give you is the kids can open their eyes and see that I'm an African-American band director. That's pretty obvious. And I don't say that to be, snorty or anything, but whatever I say to them, they hear those words coming from the band director that they respect, the band director that they adore, and oh, by the way, he happens to be an African-American band director. Having gone to the University of Texas was huge, because in most of my classes, there weren't very many students that looked like me. And I learned, this is Don Haynes, I learned not to focus on that. I worked real hard to make my A's or B's or whatever I got, and carry my load in marching in the band program or whatever it was, playing in the wind ensemble or the symphony orchestra. I had to play my part, because that's what we do as musicians. But right now, our society right now is at a place where this is a great opportunity for us to have conversations about including so-and-so. It's really hard for middle school and high school kids not to form a clique. That's going to happen. But don't focus on being negative amongst your little clique group. And that's not a bad word. It's just a word to describe who your best buddies are. They don't have to say anything ugly about someone else, because we see that. They make movies about that. And that's the real world in many cases. But this is where the band director can say, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's stop that. I'll tell you a quick story. I think your audience will enjoy this. When I first got to LBJ in 1975, the French horns, they had about 19. It was a big band. About 19 horns, and the percussion section, especially the battery. Back then, we didn't have a front line. Remember now, this is the mid-70s. The battery and the French horns absolutely hated each other. And I have no idea why. They were spitting fire across the field at each other. And then I was like, where did this come from? And eventually I said, okay, that's got to stop. And since I am the big daddy here, I called in the section leaders and said, that's going to stop. And it was not an easy thing to make stop, but it had to start somewhere. We're not going to call names, and you're not going to scream ugly things across the field. So, that's just an example of where something was not smooth and beautiful in terms of, everyone singing Kumbaya, because that's not going to always happen. But I think that sort of signifies or represents rather how sometimes we can be pitted against each other. So, but getting back to how do we start that conversation? consider yourself as a band family. Your high school band, your entire band is a band family. And just like any other family, we're going to have our tits and tats, and we're going to stump our toes, and so-and-so is going to say something that hurts somebody else's feeling. But at the end of the day, we're all in the same band program. Well, if you'll use that model, if we can learn how to get along with each other, and that's our goal, then that's preparing you to get along with people after you graduate from this high school. Because it can be an ugly world out there. And you're going to be driving down the highway and somebody's going to call you a name because they didn't like that you got in front of them, but you thought you did it appropriately and legally. You had your blinkers on. You know, you just got to really be ready for some ugliness as well as the beauty that's out there.
Your stories and the analogies and how they relate to this topic are interesting to me, because in the band world, it seems like there's so many times where, like you said, we just look at the trumpet itself, but we see it's what we know in value and importance of what's behind it, but we also don't let that affect that we're still trying to get all the trumpets to sound the same.
Right.
The big picture would be the same, and how that for a younger director, someone trying to okay, well, I've got to address this that fits our population or my school, and this is something we are discussing and going to have in our classroom. That what are other things, situations in our band programs that we already are doing that? It's
right.
just a different subject base, but we're still always trying to come together. You hear bands talk about family all the time.
Right.
And coming together and working together no matter what. We don't have to be best friends, but we have to work together. All those analogies and concepts we use in our programs.
Right.
Are those some ways possibly to help directors to kind of get into this with their students, and how can we relate this to something we already know?
Well, I did a really cool thing, not patting myself on the back, but I stole the idea and it was beautiful. Check this out. I was the guest clinician for the all city band for Brownsville. And it was the first time I got a chance to try this. And I was so excited about it because I had heard about it. And this is what I did. Before we started our first rehearsal, in terms of making music, I knew that some of them were from the same school, and then there were the others not from the same school, right? And I said, okay, everybody, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself, and I'll keep it short, but then I want you to look to your left and your right, and I want you to talk to the person that even if they're from your band, and then I gave them a list, start off with your name, tell them what you enjoy doing besides playing your horn, what grade you're in, just to kind of help them create that conversation. So I said, take about a minute. I could not get them to stop. They were just having a blast. And what I learned watching them do that, there were probably about 90 kids in the band. And what I learned from that, and I've done it several other times after that, what I learned is sometimes it's just a great idea to let the kids get to know each other. Start with that. We're talking about some pretty heavy stuff with social justice and treating people of color, that's heavy for kids. But we shouldn't try to shield it from them. But let's just start with, let's say you and I are both sitting down in the trumpet section, and I know your name, you know my name. And then band director says, I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to just get to know each other, the person on your left and then the person on your right. And they will take it from there. That's just one idea, just to kind of get them to start interacting on a lower level in terms of, what are your hobbies? What do you want to do when you get out of high school? Just things like that. Things that we adults would call kind of cheesy and corny, but not for them. I think beyond that, and I've struggled a little bit with this question, is what can a band director say to the students that's going to invite them to implement their value system that they've learned at home? That's the key. How they're going to implement that with what we hope that they will get out of this interaction with each other. That's a stretch for some of the kids because mom and dad think a certain way, but we don't know what that is. So that's why you want to write on the board, whatever you say, make it respectful and so forth, so forth. So, yeah, I mean, these are some really fantastic ideas. And I'm so glad that the United States of America is prepared to struggle with this. I'm gonna share this with your audience right quick. We got a phone call about a week after the CBA session, and I don't think they were related, but there was a lady who called and said, "This is Don Haynes," and I said, "Yes." And she says, "My name is so and so and so." I don't want to say her name because I don't have her permission. She says, "I'm the president of the International Flute Club." Oh, okay. And she says, "I got your name from the trombone professor at such and such university, and we're looking for someone to have conversations with our group. We're about 5,000 strong." And it would obviously be virtual. And she said, "Our bottom line goal is we just want to be better humans." Because, again, the George Floyd situation pulled the curtain back on so many different things and so many different levels. We don't have to keep going back to that, but it's where it started. And to look out and see what people are actually protesting about. I've contacted a lot of my former students. I have 2 or 3 that live in Seattle and 1 or 2 that live in Portland. I said, "What are you guys doing out there, man?" You know, just to see what their own take on it is. So I'm convinced, and then we can move on to another part of the subject matter. I'm convinced that what they learned while they were in the LBJ band is carrying on to where they are now, whether it's Portland, Seattle. I have some in New York. I have a guy that's a physics professor in Barcelona, Spain. They're all over the world. And it started with, where they were in the Edinburgh band, what they learned from you. They're going to carry those lessons forward, I promise.
What are some things we can do to help create that safer environment for our students that may not feel safe in their school, which is outside of our classrooms, but when they come into us, how are some things we might be able to do as teachers to help them go down this route?
I really like that question. And here's the first response I'll give you is ask your entire band, raise your hand if you have, and then you can ask several different questions, but let's just pick out a few. And I invite you to chime in as well. You say, raise your hand if you have ever been called a name somewhere on this campus, either stupid or dumb, go with the light terms. And then most of them will probably go, yeah. And that can open the door for you to begin to say, give me one word describing how that made you feel. And they're going to raise their hand and you go, yes, Chad. And it made me angry. Okay. Sarah, I was embarrassed. And then they're going to begin to share how name calling, that's just that one sample, how name calling makes you feel. And then you can kind of take it from there as a band director. Maybe another question. Let's see if I can come up with a real good one here. After that one sort of plays its way out, you can come back to the band family. Say, how many of you wish that you were treated better by your section leader or by your drum major or by the band directors? I mean, let's get really kind of gritty here, right? How many of you feel like you wish that you were being treated better with more respect? Find one of those words that you think will resonate well with the kids. And that's interacting with the kids without them having to say a whole lot until you call on them. And one of the things that you ultimately want to get to is words. And I know everyone has heard this. When we were little kids, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But actually, it's the opposite. Yes, sticks and stones will break your bones, but your bones can heal. In fact, when you break a bone and it begins to heal, it heals stronger at that point. That's what the scientists tell us. I don't want to find out the hard way. Yeah. And words will devastate, or they can. They'll stay with you forever. If you called me a horrible name as my trombone section leader, Chad, I'm never going to forget that.
Mhm.
No matter what you do or say, I will never forget that. So, yeah, and this is a good place to where a band director can say, there will never, ever be a place in this band hall where you call someone a name or you say something ugly. If you can't say something nice about someone, then you keep it inside your head. Let's start with that.
Mhm.
And then hopefully they will carry that on with them when they graduate and then going into the next phase of their adult life.
And that's a great way to meet the kids where they're at. I mean, we hear that, but it's so true of where they're at, because you're talking about outside of the class, which is a lot of their day, but
Yeah,
yet also in our band family, which they spend hopefully 4 years and a lot of hours and a lot of time in that band hall or on a practice field or in a concert and practicing
right.
things. Both those both seem like good ways to find the kids and let them have that voice without putting them on the spot, because that's
Right.
always a cautious spot we want to be careful with, but yet open the door for them too.
Right. Let's take that little example of asking the kids, how many of you have been called a name or been called something, and how did it make you feel? The next paragraph, or the next really crucial part, would be, if you could communicate how that made you feel to that person without calling a name, what would you say? And then I would just say, this is the opportunity to really focus on it in the band. So without calling your name, if someone has ever said anything to you that really crushed you or just devastated your feelings, without calling a name, what would you say to that person? And I think that will start the dialogue coming. And then the kids would, oh, they go, oh, I know, I want to tell you what I would say. And from all of that those interactions, they would begin to feel that, wow, that really does hurt people when you call them a name or when you say something ugly about it. Or somebody's gossiping about your friend and they hear, oh, did you hear what Chad said about you? You know, kids do that. And that's kind of the birth of what we see in the protesting streets and stuff. I don't want to get too dramatic on the audience, but that's some serious stuff where people are hurting each other. And where did that start? I don't know if you've seen this it was about 20 years ago. It was a little girl. She was a Caucasian girl, beautiful little blonde hair. And someone said, what, do you know what bigotry means? That's what the adults said. And she goes, I don't know what bigotry means. And of course you can see where the point was.
Yeah.
Do you know what discrimination means? I don't know what discrimination means. And then at the very end is, children learn what they're taught. So that's a pretty powerful message. And I think it's aimed at us adults. Be careful what you teach your kids, because that's how they learn it.
And as a band director, a music teacher, we're with our kids for multiple years. So we have that opportunity to have a positive, well, we hope it's a positive impact on those students, but it can be the opposite too, with that many hours with the student.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question. Have the days come and gone where band directors that you know of, including yourself, really allow yourself to get so disappointed, if not upset, let's use that word, with how the band is playing, that you blurt out something to the kids that is just devastating, but it's coming out of an angry band director? For example, it's like, trumpets, I don't think I've ever heard that much slop in one
Yeah.
in one phrase in my entire career. What, I mean, I'm going to shut up and let you respond to that, because sometimes we kind of lose our little halos, kind of slip and fall as well. What do you
Yeah, I'm sure it still happens. I probably have said it more than once. It's try and take the anger out of it and just smile after whatever you say that you probably shouldn't say. man, that's the worst thing I've, and
Right.
it's not. And, you go back. And so has it gone away? No, I think it's that part of, like you said, the halo slipping. We're just around the kids a lot.
Right.
Um, but it's all in the culture you create in your band hall. It's what you've set up as expectation. And so
Right.
are there people out there that yell and really get after the kids yet? I'm sure there are. Um, is it probably less? Yeah, I think our younger generation of teachers and not in the business is 20 years or longer. They have a different approach to it. And I think that's a great thing. They have a
Yeah.
very different sensibility to how they approach those things. And
Right. I have a secret phrase that I want all of your audience members to steal from me. I got lucky and came up with one. And it was a zinger, but it was totally respectful. The band wasn't playing very well at all. This was my wind ensemble, and we were getting ready for UIL, and was not a good day at all. And I stopped them and I looked at the whole band and I said, "That's not the LBJ band that I know." Oh, it went through their hearts and through their backs. And it was not, I didn't use an ugly word. I didn't say anything to a particular kid. It just basically, it's like, that's not the LBJ band I know. That's, and of course it depends on the moment. You don't want to say it too many times, but but it's something to have ready to go so that you don't, use your language. And when I was in high school, God rest his soul, Mr. Galman would start off with something that was going to be a little bit on the curse word side. That's when we knew he was really upset. But we love that man, every molecule of his body. So, and like you said, it's a relationship between director and the band. They know that you love them. Just be careful how you sing a kid. If you sing a lot of kid, this is something else I learned too. If you're angry, I'm going to make up a name. If you're angry at Johnny and you just slam him to the wall with your words, the rest of the band is on Johnny's side. They're going to, like, in their heads, they're going, "Oh, come on, Mr. D. Mr. Dempsey, no, that's too harsh." We're feeling for Johnny because, you know why? He's one of us. He's being a patoot and he's just being a clown today, but he's still one of us. We're family. And I just know that that's something we should always remember. When you zing a kid, it's indirectly zinging other kids who just like, "Oh, that's a little harsh." So it's something to remember.
yeah, and it has changed so much in the kids and how we approach them.
Yeah.
And I think there has been a big shift on that approach too. And you hear people, a lot of clinicians talk about it and guests talk about it, that do leadership and stuff. And guys that run fantastic programs talk about how they speak with their kids. And
yes.
culture they create. And it's so true. It's so important, especially now, for sure.
Especially now, right?
Very much so. All right. So this has been fantastic. Just trying to look at this conversation, this topic, and say, how does this apply to what we do? Not just that it's a topic that is in the forefront, but one that we have to face and approach, and your commentary on some means and some ways for directors to do it and actually take to their classrooms or their computers right now. And how can we help our students out and those that have questions and ways to, without creating an uneasiness at the same point, create an opportunity for them to have a voice in this and maybe where they feel or where they stand and how we have to work through this together, especially in the band world, where we do everything together.
Right.
So
I'm going to add something else before we begin to bring this to some closure. Do you remember the first session of the TBA? For those of us who didn't see it, I'm going to be a little bit long in my explanation of it. But, we did 2 sessions with TBA about awareness, inclusion, and social justice. And I had found 2 different YouTube links. The first one was where all the kids were on a starting line. Do you remember that one?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And the guy who was running this said, "Take 2 steps forward if You never had to worry about your cell phone being turned off, blah, blah, blah. Okay. If band directors want to just play that, if they're allowed, if they can get YouTube in their band hall, if they will just play that, and it lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes, oh my gosh. I mean, it brings tears to your eyes when you see it for the very first time. But Chad, and I know we band directors know this, that's the real world. But then you turn around and show it to the entire band. That speaks volumes. And yeah. And then the other one was a little bit more advanced. For the second session, the video I found was, I think it was called What Black People Will Never Tell You, or What People with Dark Skin Will Never Tell You.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some teaching tools that will help the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good. Well, it's been it's great to start down this path and have this conversation and share this with others. I think that's the most important part, that your willingness to come on and have this conversation with me, and say, okay, let's try and help out. What the Hey Band's about is, how do we take care of things that all of us band directors are dealing with, or some of us, and topics that are important that we should address, and at least have some tools. So I thank you very much for starting this conversation with us.
Absolutely.
On Hey Band Network.
My pleasure. It's been a delight.
We're going to put a pause on this for probably a couple weeks and let this video get out. And then for our audience members, if you want to send some questions in, you can reach out to Don Haynes, and we'll share his website here in a second. If you want to reach out to him, you want to reach out to me, reach out through the Hey Band Network, you're welcome to. Hey, we'd like to hear, can you talk about this conversation? Or maybe you have a situation that we can talk about the generalities of that situation and kind of help out. And it's something you feel that would really make a difference in our profession with band directors, and how we treat our students better and give them better opportunities, and how to try and move forward in 2020 as a band and as a family, for sure.
Fantastic.
So,
thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to give out I always love to give a few shout outs. And so I know there's a video that's going to go in the front of this in the back end that the Schulten and Haynes project has put together. So Mr. Haynes and his new work partner on a website have created the video that you saw at the beginning. There's another one at the end. So I know you want to talk about that briefly, where that is, and then any other shout outs you have, Don.
Okay. It's called Schulten and Haynes Marketing. And we have come up with an idea of how we can help band directors promote their programs in different ways, whether you need a little short video that you can show at the beginning of your Zoom classes, maybe use it for recruiting when you are trying to reach out to fifth graders going into sixth grade, band boosters, administrators. Just take a look at some of the samples that are on the website that will come at the very end of your closing video after we're done here, chat. And then, feel free to reach out and say, oh, I could certainly use, this is sort of commercial here, but I could certainly use you guys' services. And our little tag is 4 band directors, 5 band directors. So think about how you maybe can let us help you promote your program. We're reaching out to middle schools, high schools, universities. So hopefully we can help those guys.
Awesome. And thank you very much for the video for the Hey Band that everybody's going to see. And
awesome.
All about it. Any other shout outs you'd like to give before we finish up?
Well, just not really a shout out, but just, I do want to say this real quick. The TBA board of directors came up with the idea of having those sessions. And they called me as a former president, past president, the word we used, and said, will you be the moderator? And so we found 3 band directors that are still teaching in Texas, and then 3 that are from Texas, but they're out and abroad in the country, in terms of what's it like being a professional musician, having to wade through some of the challenges of being a person of color, and how do you teach and people to treat you that's something that I think band directors can also use is sometimes you have to teach someone how to talk to you. You have to just teach them or show them or tell them, hey, don't call me that. That's not a name that is, pleasant for me. Sometimes we have to give them teaching tools. So anyway, kudos to the TBA board. Mike Brashear and Philip Clemens were the ones that contacted me, and apparently it went over really well, but we wanted to continue. So thank you, Chad Dempsey, for picking up like a race, picking up the baton and running a few laps with this idea. I think this is great. This is kind of where our world is right now. And it's okay. It's good. It's a good thing that we can actually comfortably talk about it instead of, ooh, don't,
It's time to peel the Band-Aid off, and that's
exactly. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And do it in a careful and cautious way, and keep our students in mind also.
Yeah. Just as band directors, you want to be very responsible for how all of that unfolds. I used to always tell this to my students, I still do, my student teachers and assistants. I say, if you ever get angry with your students, don't say anything that you have to stop saying if that child's mother walked into the door at that very moment. That being said, however you talk to your band about these things, if your assistant principal or principal happens to walk in and you're having this conversation, you want them to be, wow, I'm impressed that you guys are actually having this conversation instead of, uh-oh.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again so much for having me. I look forward to part 2.
Yes, Don Haynes, thank you very much for joining me on the Hey Band Network. For those that are checking this out, we have a YouTube channel. All of our videos are housed on the YouTube Hey Band Network. And you can also find links through our Facebook page, Hey Band Network. Thank you all for joining us very much.